Hello, good morning, and welcome to our 45th Holding Space for Self and Others. Lovely to see you here. My name is Jackie Short. I'm the Director of Sydney Centre for Creative Change, and I'm really excited that you're able to join us for this free 1-hour webinar today. If you're watching this live, it'll be an hour and 15 minutes. And if you're watching the recording, it'll be 60 minutes, and the recording will be available in a couple of weeks. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I come to you from today, the Eora people of the Gadigal Nation, and pay our collective respects to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging around this wide land in Australia we all find ourselves on. So great you're here, and I'm really excited to introduce Sarah Kanata to you in just a moment. She gives her apologies, she's not able to make it live for us today, so she's given us a recording of her presentation, which will be on embodied writing as a healing tool. She's very experienced personally and professionally in this space, and she's going to offer some personal reflections about how this has really helped her healing and recovery from a significant mental health disorder and physical disorder she was suffering through her 20s. And she's going to be sharing some great exercises that we can do ourselves. So if you do have some paper, that's going to be really helpful. If you've got a journal or just some paper that you'd like to write on, and something to write with. You can type if you prefer. I actually like writing longhand, maybe that's reflecting my age. So if you prefer to type, you can do that. But we will be stopping through this presentation, and she's offered a number of writing prompts and exercises to get us using some of these techniques so we can get a felt sense of it that can be helpful for us, but also to give us a sense of how we could use this for others that we work with. After the presentation of this topic that we're going to be looking at in just a moment, I'm going to give you an opportunity to reflect with a couple of other people on how this was to do and how you might be able to apply or adapt or use some of these methods with those with whom you're working. So stay around till the end, because it is always really lovely to connect with others live and have a bit of a direct chat. And we'll open the forum to general questions at the end of that as well. We've got a free giveaway of another 90-minute webinar that we've got coming up next week. That's a $50 giveaway, so stay around for that. And then obviously access to the link to be able to do the quiz and get your certificate should you want that for an hour today as well. So looking forward to diving in, and as I said, great to have so many people here today.
Hello, everyone. First of all, a massive thank you to Jackie for having me, and thank you to everyone for attending this session. I really hope that you get a lot out of this session. So today we're going to be talking about embodied writing as a healing tool. So I always like to begin with a quote, and the quote that I've selected for this session is from Sandra Marinella. I could be botching up that last name, so apologies to Sandra if that is the case, but it reads, "There are thorny, unfinished chapters being written in our lives all the time. Writing can help us find our way through these challenges." Now, the reason that I selected this quote for today is because this is essentially how I view writing and how writing speaks to me. So the way that I speak about writing is that it's a tool that can help us with healing and self-care. And I'd really like to establish early on the way that I frame my work. So embodied writing and anything else that I'm going to talk about in this session, or even what I speak about generally outside of this session, none of it replaces any professional treatment or medical support that people are currently receiving or intend to receive. That said, it can definitely complement it. So I always like to make that clear from the outset. This is not a replacement for any professional medical treatment that people are engaging in. So I'm a big fan of participatory sessions. So I don't think it's all that fun just to sit and listen to someone for a lengthy period of time. So I thought that we could start today with a quick writing task. So hopefully you've got a pen, paper, or at least something to type with handy. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to answer this question. So how are you feeling at this moment? What I'll do is I'll play some music in the background, just some nature sounds. If that grates on you, or if you've had a negative traumatic experience with anything to do with nature, perhaps just mute it. But I'll give you a couple of minutes and then we'll come back. And I'm actually going to do all of the activities during this session with you. So here we go. Hopefully you can hear that sound okay on your end. I'm just going to set the time and give us a couple of minutes, and I'll be back shortly. Just another 30 seconds to go. So I'll just invite you to wrap up the sentence that you're currently writing, and I'll pause the nature sounds there, and we will come back. So moving into today's agenda, I always think it's nice to know what you're in for. So I'll start with my background and how I found this work. I actually do not like talking about myself. However, I think it's always good to understand how someone who's talking to you about something actually found that particular work. Then I'll define embodiment. So obviously I'm talking about embodied writing. So I feel like actually defining the word embodiment is important. I'll run through very briefly what the research says about writing, and I'm sure that many of you have come across what I'll discuss in your time before. I'll take you through some embodied writing and guiding principles. I'll touch on the important safety with embodied writing. I always say there's absolutely no rules when it comes to writing, but I do feel like cultivating safety is the one non-negotiable in terms of what I teach. Then we'll move into a few activities in terms of writing prompts and give you some actual time to write so that you can experience what I'm talking about. And then I'll end by offering you a free PDF called Write Your Way to Healing Quick Start Guide, either for your personal use, or you can feel free to pass it on to your clients as well. So on to me and my least favorite topic, which is basically talking about me, but here we go. I am an embodied processing practitioner. So embodied processing is a body-based approach to working with trauma. Now, I've said the word trauma, so I feel like it's important that I define it from my lens. And my definition is very much in line with Dr. Gabor Mate's work. So he defines trauma as being what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. So it's not what happens to us as such. And if you think of trauma with that lens, you can see just how subjective trauma is. So for example, two people can experience the exact same event. One person will feel quite traumatized after, and the other person may never think about it again in their life. So with embodied processing, what we're really doing is beginning to reconnect with the felt sense of the body. And then that has a knock-on effect in terms of impacting our psychological patterns and everything else that's really going on for us in our life. Now, if you're anything like the average person, and we're all definitely guilty of this, we go throughout our day completely on autopilot, which is all well and good until one day our body screams out to us and cries out for our attention. And often it's too late. So what I'm really a big fan of and what I really put forward with this work is helping people to reconnect with their body. So I'm also a trauma-informed coach certificate, and both of those top 2 certifications are through the Centre for Healing here in Australia. I'm an accredited mental health first aider through Mental Health First Aid Australia. In terms of my background, I'm also a trained journalist, and I've been working in communications for over the last decade now. I am quite widely published, as you can see there. I have a picture book, hopefully another picture book out this year called Amber Ambitious. But out of everything on that slide, by far the most important point is that last point, and that's the lived experience point. So I actually unknowingly began writing or using writing as a healing tool when I was in my early teens. So fairly early on in my life, and way before I ever went into actually turning writing into a career. So from about 13 to 23-ish, I had a very serious illness. I actually had an eating disorder called anorexia nervosa. And looking back in hindsight at that period, what I really discovered was that writing helped me to cope with and to find my way out of what was essentially a very dark period, as you can imagine. Now, I am going to confess that I almost left out the specific detail of the eating disorder as I was preparing for this today, because often I find that people get really caught up on that specific detail, and it often really waters down everything else that I teach. But in saying that, I also think that the secrecy adds to the shame and the stigma. So the reason that I'm confessing that is just, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you any of this, but the shame and the stigma is still very much there. Now, in my case, I was fortunate enough to regain my health at about 23-ish. And the other thing that I should mention is that you'll notice that my timeline is not very specific. And that's because one of the symptoms that I experienced during that period was memory loss here and there. So I have huge gaps in my memory. Sadly, I do tend to remember the more unfortunate events, which there were quite a few, given I did live with anorexia for 10 years, which in hindsight is quite a long period of time. But the unique thing about my story, and it is not something that I advocate for at all, and I do really like to make that clear whenever I talk about this topic, but the unique thing about my story and my experience is that I never really received any extensive professional support or treatment for anorexia. And having investigated and done my own research on anorexia since, I know that that is not something that is common at all. So just to paint the picture for you, I did regularly see my GP, either weekly or fortnightly, can't 100% remember at this point. And there was a period where I did receive psychology sessions, and that was for whatever was subsidized at the time. So I feel like it was maybe 10 or 12 sessions. But really, that was the extent of the professional support that I received. In saying that, I did have a very dedicated mother who I'm forever grateful for, that she didn't give up on me, because you can only imagine that over the course of 10 years, it's a really long time to basically be living and breathing anorexia. And as anyone who's had any kind of personal lived experience with any eating disorder really understands, it's a 24/7 illness. It really never lets anyone let up and have a little bit of breathing space. So in my story, so once I regained health at about 23-ish, as I said, a large part of my coping mechanism for really dealing with what had happened to me, like I said, 10 years is a really long period of time, especially during that developmental period. And I'd be lying if I said to you that I haven't thought, and even sometimes I'm still guilty of it, all of the what ifs that come up. So what could I have achieved? What if this happened? What if that happened? But at the moment, in this context, I'm speaking as a 35-year-old now, it almost sometimes feels like it's another lifetime. That's how removed it is from my current day-to-day reality. And it's something that I've come to accept. And it really gives me pleasure to use that experience in terms of the writing sense, actually talk about embodied writing and to do this work, because I really do believe that writing is an incredibly powerful tool, and not just in terms of my personal experience. I've since worked one-on-one with several clients dealing with a breadth of what they would consider issues or challenges, and writing can really help. And it's one of the most accessible tools that we have available to us. If you think about it, it's available 24/7. There are certain things that if you woke up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., you feel very alone. There's not many people you can call at that time. There's not many people that you can wake up at that time, but you can always, always, always write. So like I said, in my 20s, from about 23 onwards, I just completely ignored it ever happened. And it really just became this big, dirty secret. The other part of the picture was that I was always quite ambitious, and I was really frightened that my employer at the time would find out and that it would completely ruin my career. So there was a lot going on there. But then at 30, everything changed, and there was some kind of drive or inner pull. It's really hard for me to actually articulate and to put into words, but there was a pull to actually go back to investigate the past to be able to move forwards. So from there, I started engaging in a lot of personal development work, started researching eating disorders and more specifically anorexia, and very quickly figured out that I'm actually pretty lucky to be alive considering my situation. I'm not exaggerating here at all, but I did come very excruciatingly close to not being here. So in connecting the dots, it really didn't make sense, because I was reading about how dangerous anorexia is, and somehow I'd managed to, obviously I had my supports. Like I said, I had my mum, I had the GP, that period of psychology, but I'd managed to basically dig my way out of this huge hole. And then I came to the question of how. And what I realized, and this was definitely the case when I started doing the embodied processing work and connecting the dots in terms of all the other professional development work that I was doing, backtracking, I realized that writing was the one thing that helped me to survive long enough until other things really became more important in my life. And really what happened to me is the eating disorder just blended into the background. So after I went to university and got my Bachelor of Journalism, I started working full time, and then I started creating connections with people. And that often involved going out to lunch, going out to drinks on a Friday night. And at a certain point, it just wasn't the most important thing to me anymore. And like I said, it's just like over time, it blended into the background, and I almost didn't even realize it was happening. It was just one day, okay, this is not important to me anymore. And again, I reiterate, this is my experience. I'm not saying it's the same for everyone else, and I would never assume that is the same for everyone else, but this is my story. So I realized that writing was a really important part of recovery for me, because it was the one thing that I enjoyed, the one thing that I could see a future for myself in. And also, this was the big missing jigsaw piece for me. It was the one thing that allowed me to get out of the thoughts in my head, which were obviously pretty dark at that time, and to reconnect with my body and to come back into the felt sense of the body. And to this day, thinking back, it actually doesn't take me all that much to just cast my mind back, and I'm right back there. I still remember the feeling of writing in my notebook, and within 3 to 5 sentences, just a calmness coming over me, and just instantly feeling like things were going to be okay. And by the way, a lot of what I wrote during that period did ultimately get destroyed for obvious reasons. They weren't very nice things. But anyway, so that's a little bit about me. I'm going to leave it there, and we're going to stop and do another quick writing task. So I'll give you another couple of minutes to answer this question. So what does embodiment mean to you? So I will define it in the context of embodied writing and my work, but I'd like you to contemplate the question and jot down whatever comes to mind, and try not to overthink it. I'll play the music again, and I will say we're likely to get several definitions for this term because I've tried this exercise before. But in any case, I'll play the music and start the timer, and then we'll come back. Just give you another minute or so. So I'll just invite you to wrap up the sentence that you're currently writing. I'll switch off the music and I will go back. So in terms of embodied writing and the way that I talk about embodiment, it's being aware of the felt sense in the body, which also includes awareness of emotions and mental activity as well. So I think that that's really important to realize the mental component too, because often people talk about completely ignoring or shutting off the mind. And in my opinion, it's actually not possible. And trust me, I have tried. So I just thought it would be good to clarify what exactly I'm talking about when I talk about embodiment and use terms such as embodied. So I'm going to touch on and give a brief overview in terms of the research around writing. Now, I'm sure many of you have come across James Pennebaker's research in the past, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If anyone is interested in learning more about this particular study or any of the other many future studies, please go ahead and head over to Google Scholar. You'll find a bunch of stuff. The reason that I like to include this particular slide is because I always like to say that this evidence around writing is not just something that I'm putting forward as my lived experience. There's actually a lot of research that backs up what I'm saying. So James Pennebaker was the first researcher to study the therapeutic effects of writing using expressive writing, and that was back in 1986. So quite some time ago now. The actual study was actually pretty simple. So over 4 days, participants wrote for 15 minutes each day. There was a control group that wrote about specific topics. The other group, the experimental group, wrote about the most traumatic experiences of their lives. Now, to cut to the chase, the findings were that relative to the control group, the experimental group made fewer visits to the doctor in their following months. So I think that that's pretty amazing. Like I said, in follow-up studies, Pennebaker went to great lengths to seek to understand the initial findings better. But this is just an overview, just to really reiterate from a scientific and research perspective, the benefits of writing. As I said, head over to Google Scholar, and you'll find tons more evidence where this came from. So on to embodied writing. So what exactly is embodied writing? So it's different to how people typically journal or keep a diary. It's not an out-of-body experience. So I always feel that writing always has the potential to become a bit of an out-of-body experience. And in some circumstances, I think that's perfectly okay. I mean, working in communications, I can't say that every sentence that I write, I'm feeling into my body and considering the felt sense of the body. I think that would be unrealistic. But when it comes to using embodied writing as a healing tool, feeling into that felt sense of the body, really tuning into the body, and allowing the body to guide our writing, now that does take a little bit of practice, is really beneficial in my experience. So this is not a massive brain dump without any connection or awareness of what's happening in our body. It's important to remain open and curious throughout the process. And what we're doing is we're inquiring into the felt sense of the moment. And we come to embodied writing with the perspective that all parts of us are welcome as we're writing. Even those parts of us that sometimes, and we're all guilty of this, we pretend don't exist. So we're asking questions like, what am I feeling in the body as I write? What am I feeling as I write a particular word? What am I feeling as I write a particular sentence, particular paragraph about a particular topic in general, and noticing those changes. And like I said, it does take a little bit of practice. And I should also clarify, so when I say writing, it's very different for different people. So I've worked with some people who can write slabs and slabs of content and copy. They'll put aside their 10 to 15 minutes daily and come up with pages and pages of content. Then there's other people who write in disjointed sentences. There's other people who just use words here and there. It's all fine. I would say just feel into what feels natural for you, and also just be curious in terms of how it changes over time. So the question I almost inevitably get from people, having worked in this space for quite some time now, is, Sarah, I'm really time poor. I've already got so much stuff on my to-do list. How do you want me to possibly write every single day? And the way that I talk about writing is actually very manageable. So what I say to people is put aside 10 minutes each day. Doesn't matter if it's before work, doesn't matter if it's between meetings, doesn't matter if that's at lunch, before bed. Writing should fit in your lifestyle, not the other way around. So people often get quite flustered and stressed. It's not supposed to be another thing to add to your to-do list. So set aside that 10 minutes a day. Doesn't even have to be the same time every single day, but make a commitment to yourself and just see what happens. And the other big thing, if you do happen to miss one day for whatever reason, I mean, life happens, it's okay. All is not lost. Just get back into the habit the next day. I will say, I do feel like it's important to create consistency with this practice, because it's only when you start creating that consistency that you can really accurately track how it's changing you. Is it improving your life? What are you noticing? Are you noticing that you're better able to handle any challenges that pop up throughout the day? Are you noticing you're able to sleep better at night? That's a big one for many people. And I always say, use writing prompts if they help. You'll get to a certain point where you don't even need the writing prompts anymore. But depending upon what time of the day, we can use a few different approaches. So if you're writing first thing in the morning, you can use, what is my intention for the day? If you're writing in the middle of the day and you're feeling a little bit flustered, because we all have too many things to do on our to-do list and we're all human, you could potentially ask yourself, what on my to-do list can wait until tomorrow? And then maybe if you're writing before bed, you could ask yourself, what have I done today that has moved me closer to my short or long-term goals? And then in terms of whether you keep or destroy what you're writing, I think there's two very definitive schools of thought on that one. So some people like to destroy everything, and I think everyone is different. Personally, from my perspective, for the day-to-day writing, I really like to keep it, because I like going back in time and just noticing things like what's consistently draining me, what's consistently energizing me, and then with whatever I have control over, actually looking to improve my life and see what I can add, subtract, that kind of thing. If I am writing about anything that's a little bit more traumatic, I prefer to destroy it personally, and that usually looks like shredding. Some people love burning, but I'm far too clumsy to burn things because I think it could go terribly wrong for me. But really, what I say is experiment and see what works for you. That's really the best thing, the best piece of advice I can give you for everything that I'm talking about today. So on to some guiding principles. I mentioned it before. So the way that we're approaching embodied writing and our sessions is that all parts of you are welcome, even the parts of you that you pretend don't exist. We're writing freely. There's no rules here. We're not worrying about the quality of the writing. We're not trying to create the next Harry Potter or the next Lord of the Rings. I say write for yourself first, with the option to share your writing with someone who's trusted, like a health professional. And the reason I say this is because often at a subconscious level, when we know that someone else is potentially going to be reading our writing, we can actually start censoring ourselves. So, I mean, obviously, if you have someone who's trusted, like a health professionals, definitely go for it. I touched on destroying or keeping your work earlier. So again, experiment, try both, see what happens. Not worrying about the quality of the writing. Ensure support is on hand as needed. And support can look like different things to different people. Could look like professional support. It could just be as simple as having a pet who can go up and have a cuddle, who can make you feel a little bit more regulated if you do tip into overwhelm while you are writing. Most importantly, be gentle with yourself and listen to your body. I will say safety is crucial. And I'll say, from my perspective and my experience doing this work, without safety, there is no healing. So often when I'm working with a client, what I notice is what's most important is not necessarily the techniques or tools that we engage with, but it's really having that container of safety where the person feels like that they're accepted regardless of whatever happens within that session, and that they can tell you anything and it will still be okay. And I think that that is really important. So on to cultivating safety. So I mentioned this earlier and I've touched on it a couple of points during this presentation. So this is really the most important element of embodied processing. The thing is, writing can be triggering. So it's really important to have a safe space to return to if you do feel triggered while you're writing. So what we don't want to do is re-traumatize ourselves or our clients if you're working with someone else. And sometimes people get caught up on language. So if you or your client doesn't resonate with the word safety, you can use support, comfort, stability, or if no words are working, you can just think of what is the opposite of overwhelm. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So how do we cultivate this safety or support, stability, so on? We can do this in a lot of different ways, and everyone is unique. I've seen all kinds of things with the people that I've worked with, but to summarize, it could be a memory, a person, a pet. Lots of people find safety in their dogs, cats, that kind of thing. It's also within the body as well. But I will mention, if someone has a lot of trauma, it can be really hard to find safety in the body. And then if we're really struggling, what we can do is we can go to an imagined place. So the whole purpose of having this place of safety, this notion of a place to return to, is basically if we are triggered at any point while writing, we can come back to this place. It's always, like I said, it's important to listen to your body and not to try to push through anything that you may be feeling, but definitely stop, come back to this cultivating safety, this place. In embodied processing language, we actually call this a resource. So come back to the resource and really don't push yourself. And it could just be a matter of, for whatever reason at that point in time, writing about whatever is just tipping you into overwhelm. So over time, what you'll notice, the more that you cultivate this resource and this safety. So I'll speak about me from a personal level. It took me a little while to get this concept. I understood it at a cognitive level, but I'm not sure that I ever felt it until I had the feeling in my body. So I started off with some guided meditations and I just went to an imagined place. And then over time, I started getting more and more comfortable with what am I actually talking about when it comes to safety? What does it even feel like? And it sounds silly, but it can be tricky for people to understand what this notion of safety, support, comfort, opposite of overwhelm is. And then over time with daily practice, it is something that I say is a lifestyle. It's not something you just do once and then you're done. I wish that were the case, but sadly it's not. But with practice over time, I've actually been able to come into my body. And what I find is that if I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety during the day, something stressful's happened, whatever, I can come back to my resource. And typically I actually use an anchor as well. So once I do get to that place of safety, comfort, support, whatever language you're using, I actually anchor it into one hand on my belly, other hand on my chest, and just take a few deep breaths. Now, over time, what I've been able to do is essentially come back to that belly, chest, hand positioning. And within a few moments, my anxiety or whatever's going on for me in that moment dramatically improves. And it just helps me to actually go on throughout my day, regardless of what happens. So they're the basics and the foundations of embodied writing. So let's go ahead and actually do some writing. So, question for you. So how have I cared for myself this week? So again, what you're going to do now is basically you're going to answer the question, but unlike what you were doing potentially earlier in the session, what I would like you to do is to pay particular attention to what's happening in your body as you write. So any number of things can be happening. You can be noticing your feet on the floor. Maybe you can notice your bum on the chair. Maybe you're noticing that certain words trigger you, and then take that to the next level. So if you're noticing that, what does that look like? Am I getting an elevated heartbeat? Am I noticing some butterflies in the stomach? Am I getting a strange tingling sensation right throughout my body? So whatever you're writing about, what's the lived experience of that in your felt sense? Now, the important thing is that if at any point in time you feel triggered, please do stop and go back to your place of safety. So if you can't actually think of anything off the top of your head, a really good one that I use with most clients is actually sinking into and feeling their feet on the floor. Almost everyone can do that without too many issues. Or if the feet on the floor don't work for you, just try coming back to your presence in the chair. So the bum on the chair, and really getting back into your body and being present and reminding yourself that you are safe and nothing is wrong at all. So what I'll do is I'll play the music again. I'll give you about 5 minutes or so, and then we'll come back again. I'll see you soon. About halfway through now. It's about another 20 seconds to go, so just start looking at wrapping it up. I'll just invite you to wrap up that last sentence that you're on. So we will move on to the next prompt. Now, this one may be a little bit more triggering. So what happened this week at work, while studying, in life? Apply it to whatever your unique circumstances are that I haven't let go of yet. So what we'll do is we'll repeat the process and just take note of if anything in terms of the body feels different from when you're writing about this question to last question. And if you are feeling any sensations, just also take notice of what happens if you sink into them and feel them. Do they disappear? Do they get stronger? So we're really just maintaining an open mind and curiosity. There's no right or wrong, by the way. So I'll give you another few minutes. I'll play the nature sounds again, and then we'll come back. Just about halfway through now. Remember, if you are feeling triggered, please don't push through. Go back to your safety or your resource. Remember to keep on listening to your body as you write. About another 20 seconds. Just invite you to wrap up the sentence that you're writing, and I'll stop the sounds. So again, just in your mental note, just take note of what you notice from this question to the last question, and we'll go on to the final prompt. So what is consistently draining me and what is within my control? So again, we're going to repeat the process. Again, if you are feeling triggered, please do stop and go back to your resource. So I'll give you another couple of minutes and then we'll come back. Remember, if you're struggling to write complete sentences or paragraphs, just feel free to go with words or whatever comes to mind. It doesn't even have to make any sense at all. It's about halfway there, and then we'll look at wrapping it up. another 20 or so seconds. So just look at wrapping it up and coming back. Wrap up the sentence you're on. And I'll get you to just stop writing. I should mention, if you do happen to be on the replay, feel free to spend more time in each of those writing tasks. Or if you go back to the replay, give yourself 5-10 minutes if you like as well. That can also help with really sinking in to the felt sense of the body. So I mentioned earlier my free PDF, Write Your Way to Healing. So basically it's super simple, quick start, 2-page PDF guide. For busy people, it's great for both novices, experienced writers. It's basically embodied writing in 5 easy to follow steps. So as I mentioned, handy for yourself, or feel free to give the link to your clients. I'm sure there'll be a link in the notes as well. And it does include some writing prompts to get you or your clients started. So it's just bit.ly and then / Write Your Way to Healing. So I'm going to leave it there. So you can basically find me at my website, so sarahcanada.com. Email, feel free to send through any comments, questions, reflections. Always very happy to help however I can. And I'm on all of the usual standard social media channels. So I hope that you found this session really beneficial. It's been an absolute joy to join you today, and I will leave it there. Happy writing, by the way.
All right, thank you for participating in those writing exercises. I could see those with cameras on furiously scribbling with all those lovely writing prompts. And what I'd like to offer you now is an opportunity to connect in with 3 or 4 others. And Ellie, who's going to give you a wave, who's our beautiful admin assistant helping out today, is going in a moment to invite you into a breakout room. So if you would like to have a chat with 3 or 4 others, stay and connect in for just 10 minutes. And this is an opportunity to reflect on any of these exercises and how they were for you to do. No expectation to share anything you've written, that's personal, but just how this was for you to do and how you might be able to use some or any of these writing exercises, all the ideas of embodiment and embodied writing with any of your clients as well. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for taking that opportunity to reflect in that small group. Would anyone like to share anything that they discussed with their group just now? What this was like to do for you and how you might be able to use this with others. Lee, are you just waving your hand there? Or did you just manage to accidentally scratch and now I've picked on you?
Hi, Jackie. Yes, I can answer. We all found a similar process, definitely found a difference in how and what we wrote about from the start before the directive of getting into the body, and how our writing and our thoughts changed from probably more of a cognitive approach to more of a feeling and getting out of our head and into our body. We all noticed that shift once the direction was given by Sarah, which was really cool, being very mindful. And yeah, I think moving forward, utilising it with, I'm definitely going to look up her PDF and have those questions valid. I've just been seeing a few teenagers recently, and especially a few girls, and I can see that this might really help them to get out of their head and into their body more, and using it as an opportunity to trial that. So I look forward to using it.
Great. Thanks, Lee. Thanks for reflecting on that. Your own processes. And I think if we can do some of these things for ourselves, we can get a real felt sense of the benefits of them. And writing can be quite a cognitive exercise, particularly if you're writing a lot for work. If you're doing case notes or reports, we often have to be really in our heads. So this invitation to shift to a more right brain, creative, embodied process will elicit very different responses and great reflections on how you might be able to use it there, Lee. Anybody else want to offer anything about their experience of this?
I just noticed, it's Liz, I noticed it was just a very different process. Normally when I write, I'm very much in my thinking space. So it was a really lovely, different experience to actually intentionally connect into what I was experiencing in my body. So I liked that. was something that was quite different. Look forward to practicing with it some more, and then potentially using it with clients.
Thanks, Liz. And I think, Jean, you wanted to say something too?
Yeah, no, the group was really good. It was excellent. I found in my own situation, I've been doing a mindfulness course for 8 weeks, and it's on a disc. And I had to go away to Central Coast, so I had my recording on the phone. So, but then the other thing we had to do was writing in a mindfulness way, and doing something that we normally wouldn't, like go out of our comfort zone to do, and then write about it. So this is good too, this skills up into looking at the body, because when you write, you tend not to worry about your body doing things. So it's actually pulls you back into looking at your body and looking at your spirituality as well, and the true self is important, I think.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And there was a question here from Narelle, I know, a little bit earlier. Are you supposed to include in your writing the things you sense and notice? I would say yes. I would say if we're doing a process that's very much about embodied writing, all our felt senses and physical experiences are really worth noting and paying attention to, because I think they're really important ways of coming back to that felt and that lived sense of body. And I think you can choose which direction you go. You can continue to focus on those bodily physical senses, or you can follow more the prompt question, or maybe there's a way of bringing those together. And I'm wondering if anyone had those experiences and how you balanced both of the direction of the writing prompt invitation as well as what was happening in your body. Does anyone want to speak to what that was like? Or Liz, maybe after being in that group, is there any, sorry, Narelle, would you like to say anything about further reflections on that question? Would anyone like to respond to that?
Yeah, I reckon Kim should jump in, because we talked about that in our group, and I loved the way she approached it. So I might just hand the baton over to Kim, if you're comfortable, Kim, to share.
Thanks, Narelle. Yeah, no, I'm actually a long time ago, I'd studied Gendlin's focusing work. And then I'm doing a somatic training at the moment, so I've got a bit of a heads up. But I wrote down about what does embodiment mean, as the body is invited to share its perspective. And I mentioned to Narelle in the group that I feel the body has such wisdom and we kind of overlook it. And the other thing I found helpful was, after the question prompt, I put a line down the middle of the page and I put what on the left. So, you know, what is consistently draining me? The what was on the left column, and then on the right, the embodied felt self feeling. So I kind of did that kind of thing. And I found that really helpful, because I could write down, I feel a certain, you know, I know what is draining. And then literally I'd look at the blank on the next column, and up came the body. That right column was the invitational space for the body to share what was happening for it.
Lovely. Thanks, Kim. Thanks for articulating that so clearly. And I love that division, so you can really pay conscious attention to both of those things. That's beautiful. And thanks, Narelle, for inviting Kim in there. Wonderful. So I'm really glad that you found this useful, and I will send out the link again if any of you want to follow up the PDF that, that Sarah's offering for us as well. We have a few other things to just review before we finish up today. And one of those is some of our upcoming events. So we have another one of these free events coming up in the next month, which I definitely want you to know about in case you're interested in joining that one as well. And there's now bookings available for that. If you like this idea of writing and can see the benefits of it therapeutically, I would also encourage you to think about our therapeutic storytelling workshop next week. We've got a few places left in that. That's a 3-day, half-day workshop that's available next Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. They're Sydney times, and you can access that on our website. The following week, we've also got a Supporting Grieving Children 3-hour training with Beate Stella. We have an art therapy in adult mental health webinar for 90 minutes. We have a building creative resilience, inspirations about loss and change from older adults, and Beate's running that one as well. And she's just published a book on this area, which is super exciting. The wonderful Vicky Shakuroglu is going to be running a 6-week program, and there's only 2 spaces left in that. That's only 12 people in that small group. And that's on everyday creativity, using very simple drawing processes to be reflective of self and to be connected with the place that we're in now. So that's a really lovely group if you're interested in that. And Sue Lawrence is running a creative arts program for adult trauma survivors on the 5th of May. And the next free one of these is bringing nature-based interventions into professional and personal practice. So that's our next holding space for May if you're interested in registering for that. Thank you all for being here. Would love any feedback about what's useful for you today. If you want to pop that into the chat now, or the email link that'll be sent from the booking site in a few moments will come out to you as well. So thanks all for attending, and lovely to see you today. Have a lovely day. See you next time. Bye now.